Hey, so today I thought I'd go over a really quick and easy way to add modulation to your sounds. It's the fastest way that I've found to just quickly spruce things up and make them sound a little more interesting. Some of my settings are probably a bit extreme for what other people are doing, but they work for me. So let's hop into it. The reason you might want to modulate sounds is to make them more interesting. The classic way to do that is to add phases or choruses or flanges, things like that. And the idea is to create movement within the sound or to radically shape or color the texture of the sound overall. So there's a bunch of tools in Ableton to do that. You already know about them. They're most of the effects. The auto filter, maybe the auto pan, chorus, the erosion, flanger, all those sorts of things. I've got a short loop here and I'll just play it through so you can get a feel for how static it is at the moment. Here we go. So that's okay. I mean, it's got some notes, so it's a good start. This little sweep at the end of the bass line, I mean, I like it, but it's pretty boring. All right, so what can we do to that? Well, I have this rack that I've built for myself called All Modulators. So I'm going to load that in and we're going to listen again. Hugely different. Okay, so what has that done? It's added a phaser using the preset wide. It's added an erosion. It's added a flanger. It's used a chorus, and it's used a vocoder, and it's used a frequency shifter, and then it's rounded it off with a little OTT. And don't worry about the EQ too much. We'll get into that later. So all of those is too extreme. We've taken the sound from this to this. So maybe that's a little bit much. We can turn off the erosion and the vocoder and the frequency shifter. All right, so now we've gone from this to this. I think that's really nice. I can still hear the flanger a little bit much. Maybe we'll dial that back a bit. And all that's done is taken a double click on all modulators and turning off a few on-off switches. To me, that's way faster than loading a phaser, loading a flanger, loading a chorus, loading a vocoder, deciding not to use it, loading a frequency shifter, deciding not to use it, and then slapping an OT on top of it. Just having one rack ready to go with a bunch of on-off buttons that you can toggle on or off to change the effect. Really useful for just creating a completely different sound without having to think too much about it, because what I wanted to do was make that sound more interesting, and I've done it with a couple of clicks rather than having to think about each step as I went. Does it work on everything? Well, we've got our chords here. If you don't remember them, this is what they sound like. They're very dry, very static. Let's find all modulators. Way more interesting. So I really like the flanger on that. Probably don't need the erosion. Probably don't need the vocoder. Nice and zappy. So what does our loop sound like now? Way more interesting. For reference, here's what it was before. So I think we really improved it with just a couple of little alterations that we didn't have to think about too much. You know, if you have to stop and think at every step in your production process, you're going to be really slow. So I wanted to go through building a new all modulators rack. So let's get rid of the existing one. So we're just back to our chords. And let's start from scratch. So how do we build it? Well, we just go through audio effects. We grab anything that adds modulation. So let's grab an auto filter. Let's grab an auto pan. Let's grab a chorus. Let's grab erosion. I mean, erosion's not really a modulator. Let's leave it out this time. Definitely want a flanger. And we want phaser. Do we want the vocoder? The vocoder's kind of interesting. Let's chuck him in there. Okay, so we've got a bunch of effects across the bottom now. Our chord now sounds like this. Okay, so that's too extreme. That noise, that's the vocoder. So we'll just make it, we'll put it onto modulator mode. We'll do enhance. Okay, that's interesting. It's still pretty extreme, but extreme isn't necessarily bad. The filter I'm kind of worried about, because to me it sounds a bit obvious if everything's just doing sort of wah filtering. Yeah, but we'll leave it for now. Oh, and the auto pan, we can turn that right up. And is the chorus in a reasonable setting? That sounds nice. What about the flanger? Anyway, let's go through. We'll rack them. So Command G, create a rack. Chain, let's call this effects. One of the things I like to do with modulation effects, because they can change the bottom end of your sound. In our case with this chord, it doesn't matter too much. We're probably not going to need the bottom end of this sound, but if we were putting it on our bass instrument from before, it could create phasing or issues in the low end, which we don't necessarily want. So what I like to do whenever I'm using modulators that I'm not sure how they're going to be used in the future is I just cut the bottoms off, so you know, around 100 Hertz, and create a dry sub chain. So we just create a new chain, call it sub, put another EQ on there, and do the opposite EQ of what we did in the modulators. So the modulators has an EQ at the end, which cuts off the sub, and the sub channel has an EQ, it's the only thing in there, which keeps the sub in there. So if we play this example, we're not going to hear much. And the top channel is all of the tops, everything that isn't sub. So that shouldn't have made a real change to how our particular case sounds, but it's nice in case we want to chuck it on a bass instrument later. Cool. Okay, so let's test that our rack makes sense by turning things on and off. So let's turn off the vocoder. Yeah, that makes a big difference. Phaser, turn that off. Yep, it's making a difference. The flanger. Yep, I can hear it. It makes a difference. The chorus. Yeah, that's doing a lot of the work for us. The auto pan. Yep, it's kind of dead down the center now. Turning it back on. Yep, I can hear it traveling. And the auto filter, we're really going to hear this, I think. Off. On. We got some nice modulation. Okay, so each of those is doing something interesting in terms of modulation. So it might be a good rack for us to start with. You notice I didn't include an OT in here. Not going to. I don't see this one as being the sort of OT happy rack that I would normally use. It's just creating some basic modulation that we can chuck on anything. So I like to leave my rack saved with that switched on. And so let's call it all modulations 2 and save it. So in our bass channel we had this noise. All right, let's put all modulators 2 on it and see what it sounds like. Again, all modulators kicks goals. It sounds far more interesting. It could do with a little bit of compression, but I hope that shows you that you can really easily create a rack that you can reuse over and over again that will just create interesting sounds for you. So you don't have to think too much about it. If we had to think, oh, I'm going to add an auto filter, I'm going to add an auto pan, I'm going to add a chorus, we'd be all out of decision-making power really early in our studio session. There's a theory that every decision you make incurs a little cost and reduces your ability to make decisions again later. So if you have to make a decision every time, oh, I'm going to add an auto filter, oh, I'm going to add an auto pan, oh, I'm going to add a chorus, you'll be out of decision-making capability really early in your studio session. So just having things that you know work, that are ready to go, and just dropping them on, and then making really small, easy decisions about what to turn on and turn off. It's a lot easier than having to think about each individual step in the process. So find things that you like in your modulation suite and shove them all in a rack, and then just make them on-off buttons. So just to recap, we've created an all modulations rack, which includes all of the modulation options available to us out of the box, and we can drop that into any sound now to just instantly make it somewhat more interesting and somewhat more vibrant and have a little movement to it, which lets us go from taking a pretty plain loop from something like this to something a little bit more interesting, which sounds like this. Cool. Have a great day.